Good morning, everyone. My name is Keira Proctor, and I'm the Managing Director here at A.Proctor Limited. First of all, I'd like to thank everyone for attending. I hope you're all doing well and taking care. Believe it or not, this is our 18th webinar of 2021, and we were just short of 80,000 views of all of our webinars. So we're super proud of that and very excited about today. As you can see, we're taking a slightly different format today. This is our first roundtable event. So we have a number of very special panelists here to have a discussion around the future of construction within the UK. Should you have any questions, please email us at webinar@proctorgroup.com, direct message us on Twitter at proctorgroup, and of course you can post your questions right here in the YouTube chat feed. Again, slightly different in terms of our finish time. We will be finishing today at 11 a.m. or as close to it as we can. So should we not be able to get to your question, please make sure that you mention the panel member that you'd like to answer it when you post the question, and we'll get back to you after the event, or one of the panelists will. Our next webinar, just to date for the diary, will be the 28th of January at the usual time of 10 a.m. The topic will be fire membranes and fire solutions. So please pop it in the diary and we look forward to seeing you then. If you've registered, you'll receive a follow-up email with a link to the replay and all the links that you need regarding this webinar. It really helps us if you give us a thumbs up on our video and also subscribe to our channel. That helps you keep abreast of any content between our webinars, which I know some of you are repeat viewers. So because we have limited time today, I am going to ask the panel to introduce themselves. And what I'm going to ask you guys to do and introduce you is to just give a really quick 2 to 3 minute overview, firstly of yourself and your background and where you work, etc. And also your personal thoughts on the future of construction in the UK. Then I'll move on to a number of questions that we already have for the different forums, covering the different topics. And as I say, the viewers, please go ahead and post. We have a lot of experienced panel members here and they are very interested to hear your questions. So Lucy, good morning. If I can start with you, please.
Good morning, everybody. Hi, Keira. Hi, everyone. I'm Lucy Black. I'm Impact Director at Construction Scotland Innovation Centre, where I've been working for the last 5.5 years. My background is in economic development, innovation and commercialisation in both the public and private sectors. And for the last, I hate to say it, 20 years, and there's more still, my focus has been on working with digital technology and construction companies. And really in the last 12 years, I've worked exclusively with innovators within the construction sector right across the supply chain. So for me, what do I see as the future of construction in the UK? What do I want to see? I think I really want to see a construction sector that's driven by net zero and decarbonisation. Not just because it's mandated by government, but because it's right for the world. That public and private customers, clients are demanding net zero buildings and demanding net zero working practices. I want to see a focus on long-term value, not the lowest cost, as is so common, just the lowest cost and upfront cost. We need to be thinking about long-term value and whole life cycle costs. And equally, in decision making going forwards, we need to be thinking about embodied and operational carbon, that being absolutely key to drive us to net zero. So all in all, I think from a sector that's been very driven by economic impact, it's a sector now that will be driven by environmental, social and economic impact. And a big focus, one of the next engineering feats, I think, will be the focus on upgrading our existing buildings. 80%, it's well quoted, but 80% of the buildings that exist today will still be existing in 2045, which is Scotland's net zero target of 2050 in terms of the UK. So we really need to be building a national retrofit programme and embedding strong retrofit standards across the sector. Another 3 points I would really like to see in terms of the future of construction is a focus on local materials and local supply chains, so we can develop really strong, resilient supply chains. Bringing in a much younger and more diverse workforce, particularly to fill in the short term. There's 22,500 new roles to be created in Scotland by 2028 to achieve our net zero goals here, and that's all quoted in a recent CITB study. And in Scotland, the Scottish Government have a £100 million Green Jobs Fund. So it'd be great to have, we need to have a much younger and more diverse workforce, and a younger workforce attracted by both the use of digital tools, digital technology within the sector, but also because they hopefully are more carbon literate and really want to be part of a sector that can really make a direct impact to the reduction of carbon emissions.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Lucy. We really appreciate that. Very interesting. Thank you very much. Iain, if I could come to you next, please.
Sorry, I had to unmute there. Morning, everybody. My name's Iain Fairnington. I'm the Technical Director of the A.Proctor Group. I've been with the Proctors for over 30 years, or just coming on to 30 years. I was at Napier University for 5 years before that, doing a building engineering degree. In my summer in between the university times, I was lucky enough labour as one of the lowest of the low on the hierarchy of the building site. So I managed to get a lot of experience in watching a lot of building. So there's obviously been quite a lot of changes to building in those 35 years. In terms of the future of the construction industry, hopefully those that know me will agree that I'm a kind of glass half full character. So I've got quite a lot of optimism for the future of the construction industry. Not without some skepticism at times, but generally I have a really good feeling about the future. Climate change will bring its own challenges, but I believe the industry can rise to those. And just as Lucy was saying, net zero is really important, and those challenges can be met by the construction industry. We did it during COVID with the hospitals, and I think we can really do that along with the government support for the construction industry. We need more housing, obviously, and I'm encouraged by the growing acceptance of off-site and MMC, and this should put an end to working on sites in muddy fields and swapping that for cosy offices in factories. Oliver on the panel here today and I visited Japan to see their off-site construction. And the factories were full of transformer robots. It was quite amazing. A bit scary at times to see the lack of human activity in these offices, but they were fantastic. And it should be embraced. So new legislation's coming, which can bring CO2 emissions down. If we can take the shackles off the construction industry, the conservative standpoint, and embrace the challenge, I think we can put an end to the race to the bottom. And that would be great. If we can then buy houses not just on price and location, but other features like energy efficiency of the homes, I think it would be really, really good. It would be a great topic for dinner parties to talk about how energy efficient your building is instead of your gold taps. So I'm encouraged. The panel today is fantastic. Really looking forward to the discussion, and that's all from me for the future.
Thank you, and I love the analogy with energy efficiency versus gold taps. It's a good one. Oliver, if I can come to you next, please, if you could introduce yourself.
Hi guys, Oliver Novakovic. So I'm Technical Innovation Director for the Barratt Group. I've been there for 7 years now. I was previously at the BRE for 10 years, and then previous to that at Westbury. I started my career sort of developing off-site factories. Built one of the biggest ones in Birmingham called Space 4 that I think delivers about 6,000 units, and then moved to BRE and ran sort of sustainability and innovation in the business. So I was lucky at the BRE to work with different sectors. So everything from Audi, Marks and Spencers to DuPont and other guys. So sort of had a great overview of innovation across the sector. We didn't just drink sake in Japan. You'll be glad to know when we were there. We actually did go and see some very advanced factories. It was a combination of Scottish whiskey and construction going to Japan. So that's an interesting combination, I have to say, when you get over there, as Iain will remember. So what do I see about the future? So I see it being excitingly complicated. That's what I see about the future. I think we're going to play our part in reducing the footprint as an industry, and a really important one. And as a house builder, that's important because I actually sell my houses to customers, so I can educate my customers, you know, in how they can save carbon. But for me as an engineer, I'm building houses, and just built one called the Z House, where you wouldn't really know the difference, but you're going to save tons of carbon without actually making a difference. And why is it complicated? Because actually I've got operational energy to deal with, and everyone's throwing zeros around like they're really fashionable, but they don't really understand them. I've got embodied carbon to deal with, and I've got buildings that are close to very difficult. I was going to say impossible, but I can't use the word impossible as an engineer, to be zero embodied carbon, because I use a lot of cementatious steel and other products. I've got biodiversity. 40% of our species has died out since the 70s in England. So I play my part in that, in my gardens. If you put all the gardens together of all the new builds, I think it's the size of Wales in the last 15 years or something. So pretty chunky. Water reduction. So, you know, how do I get, you know, people to use less water? Because it takes a lot of energy to get that water to a house, to heat it up and then use it. So it's not just about water as a resource. And then finally, indoor air quality and overheating. Because as I'm going to put some big, for those fashion, like my daughter, North Face jackets on my houses. And I'm going to really drive air tightness down to its minimum. But I want people to live in it that, you know, if they feel a little bit of a draft from a ventilated window, they close it, even though that's part of the process. Or if they get a draft in the wall, they think of putting a jumper in it, because they think, you know, I shouldn't have drafts in my home. That's where I live. So for me, the excitement is very much about this excited, complicated future that, as an engineer in my core and having done innovation, I sort of can't wait to get in it. I can't say everyone's with me yet. I have to say there's a lot of scared people out there. So my job is to unscare them and make sure they see that actually it's just, you know, slowly catch the monkey process. And that's the way we're doing it at Barratt.
Thank you very much, Oliver. Stephen, if I can come to you next, please.
Unmuted and here. Good morning, Keira.
Morning.
World. My name is Steve Scaysbrook. I'm a visiting professor at Birmingham City University. I'm a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Architectural Technologists. My career has been varied across from being in practice, and that is with architects' practices all across the UK. I moved into manufacturing, which is where I met Proctors, simply because of a recession. I thought I'd stay for 6 months and stayed for 14 years. And that opened up the world to me, and different manufacturing and research and new materials and ways of developing new materials. I moved on from then into my own practice, and we did what we called heritage. And so we took the older buildings, not the sort of medium to early stuff, but the real old stuff. So we were doing big estates, old houses, mapping, doing a lot of work that was really interesting in terms of construction techniques used in the early 1900s, late 1800s, and garden layouts and plotting them, and doing a whole series of stuff within CAD, which opened up another area of interest for me. Then I got involved in the university and started lecturing slowly, and slowly I got sucked in. I became what's called a visiting professor, and my job is to mentor the students as they go through their 3 years and simply teach them detailing from heritage through to modern day and the future. What do I think of the future? Like Oliver, I'm positive, but skeptical. There are huge things going on around the globe. The weather is testing just about every design we want to put up, and also the older designs, something I hope I'll be able to talk about later, and also how COP fares. I am very interested in, because I'm a lecturer and have been now for the last, I think, 12 to 13 years, I've been a lecturer now. And so I'm very heavily into CPD, and that's something that I would like to see going forward. This is why I like the Proctor webinars. It's not just a manufacturer, it's a serious look at good construction technology, how it works, why it works, and the laws behind it. The UK is blessed with 3 very excellent law systems for construction, and we need to expand ourselves. We need to look at the rest of the world. The weather is not a UK-centered item, it is a global-centered item, and that's something that we need to concentrate on in the way that we look at the way that we plan, how we detail, and how we reformat our materials to suit the new world. The way that COP has gone, and they're all talking about the 1.5 to 2 degree reduction, I'm pretty sure that most of the people who talk about it in government have no idea what they're talking about when they talk about 1.5. It's a very complex calculation, and they need to understand that before they start spouting off about it. I'm also pretty aware that whatever we do, and I'm very into the carbon reduction, it is very important. But don't think that carbon reduction is going to change the world overnight. We are stuck now with a weather system that will keep on changing for the next 20, 30, 40 years. So we have to do adaptive architecture. We need to look at the way that we detail and design and bring new materials to the forefront. So an interesting world out there, and I do find it exciting, but I'm worried about it. I'm 70 now. Will I see the end of this? Probably not, which is probably a little sort of dour, but that's reality. So that's me, and I'm looking forward to the challenges of this this little group and see where we can go.
Thank you very much, Steve. And Sean, last but not least, if I could ask you to introduce yourself and give your overview, please.
Good morning, Keira. Good morning, everyone. My name is Sean Smith. I'm Chair of Future Construction at School of Engineering at the University of Edinburgh, and also Director of the Centre for Future Infrastructure based at the Edinburgh Futures Institute, also at the University of Edinburgh. I've worked over the last 20 years in the UK with various construction companies, government departments and others, and it's been an incredible journey. And certainly with my colleagues that I've worked with, I think we've supported over 200 products to market from a range of different things, from timber engineering to new types of block to off-site construction systems. And one of the things that inspires me most about that is how everybody comes together, interdisciplinary nature, whether it's the academics, the industry, the innovation, and the public sector. It's an incredibly exciting sector to work in. And to that end, I'm very grateful for everyone who had the opportunity to work with. I also worked overseas in Italy, Canada, and Germany with various government research laboratories and industry. And I found that a very useful opportunity to get an intersect of what's happening in these areas too. Currently, some of my projects, apart from being in Scotland and the rest of the UK, they span into the Galapagos Islands, South Africa, other parts of Europe and the Far East. So I'm getting a chance to see some of the innovations which are coming. Also getting a chance to see some of the quite scary issues, which Stephen has also touched on, and how we'll need to adapt and deliver for those. Looking ahead, well, how do I see the sector and where would I like to see it go? Well, it's absolutely transformational in what's coming. 38% of the global emissions for carbon stem from the construction sector or built environment sector. And we have a role not just in the UK, but internationally in how we can help shape and deliver that. Back home, I think there's a key issue that we need to get right, and right at the very top of government. We need construction czars. in Scotland, England, Wales, and Northern Ireland. We need to join up much faster and much better what we're doing. We can no longer do bespoke, one-off, singular projects. We need a national retrofit strategy that will combine and bring together so many solutions, but evidence-based solutions that show the technical performance, that allow our architects and others to deliver. And fundamentally, it also inspires innovation. We will have gaps in where we're going, and that's where innovation and research plays such an important role. So looking ahead, I'm excited. I think we will get there. I think we will hit net zero. But my goodness, we're going to have to absolutely step up the game and almost in a military approach, deliver what we've had to do. The industry's done this before. They did it for robust details. They brought 119 committee members from across all products and house builders and sectors. And in 1 year, they built 1,400 homes with the innovative designs, all evaluated and tested. We can do it, but we'll need everyone to work together. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sean. And to the panel, I'm going to go ahead with some of the questions we've been receiving. Can I ask if another member has something they'd like to add? So if I, for example, ask one of you a question, please feel free, just raise your hand. I'd really like people to input on every topic that's asked the panel. So please feel free to raise your hand and just ask. It's like being back at school, guys. Just if I miss it, raise it again, okay? Lucy, you talked a little bit about net zero in your intro, and I was wondering if you could just establish, and for our audience, can you explain what the difference between a passive house and a net zero building is, and what really determines the best path to follow?
Okay, I'll try my best. I suppose the difference between a passive house building and a net zero building is that one's actually a housing standard and the other's not. So net zero itself, it's a goal, it's a guide, but it's not a standard like Passive House, which is a very rigid set of standards created by the Passive House Institute and certified and measured. For instance, in a passive house, heating energy can't exceed 15 kilowatt hours per metre square. Total household energy consumption can't exceed 60 kilowatt hours per metre squared. There's airtightness measurements that must be adhered to as well. So net zero homes, it's about achieving net zero. In a way, they don't really care about how you reduce your home's carbon footprint to zero. It's just about doing it. So you could have a net zero home fueled by fossil fuels, not ideal, obviously, but you could, but you would be offsetting that by other means of energy and renewable energy. So, for instance, bringing in renewable energy sources like solar panels, but building materials are also considered key in a net zero house, and looking at technologies and equipment also that can help reduce carbon, because it's all about getting the house offset to net zero. Passive house, its key focus is really fabric first. It's about reducing emissions through insulation and air tightness. It has a really, really strong materials focus. Passive house requires a home to maintain a level of thermal comfort all year. So it's, as been mentioned earlier, it's very much about wrapping your home in a North Face jacket, wrapping your home, your walls, your roofs, your floors, all in insulation, but also ensuring that you've got heat transfer resistant doors, windows, but very importantly, ventilators to keep the air from being stale because of the the very extreme air tightness that you're trying to achieve, and using Proctor membranes in that process as well. So what determines the best path to follow between following to net zero or to passive house? It'll probably be interesting to hear from Oliver later with the Barratt Z house as a net zero house, why they took that route and not the passive house route. It's really probably how far you're trying to reduce emissions at this point in time within your building, and whether you want to go to the, not say extreme, but go to the level of having your building fully certified by the Passive House Institute, and using specialist contractors as well, your certified contractors, to actually work on it. I think it's important to say that they don't sit exclusively. You can build to passive house standards, but it'd be very quick and reasonably easy to transition to net zero from passive house, because you're already limiting your energy consumption by building to passive house standard, and the small amount of energy that you do require, you can then offset. You can offset that through solar panels or other renewable sources. So all in all, probably the best result would be to combine Passivhouse and net zero, and better together.
Thank you very much, Lucy. You obviously mentioned there the Z House, which I believe, Oliver, was Barratt's first net zero home. Is that correct? Someone's asking if you can provide a little bit more information. Perhaps you can share some information on that, please.
Yeah, sure. So it's not our first. We built a code level 6 house in 2006 when the Code Sustainable Homes came out, and that was actually a code level 6, which was 150% of regulated energy. So this is why I said about throwing zeros around. So net zero is to most people will be regulated and unregulated energy. So that's the stuff that you can calculate via the software, and then you have to make an assumption on what people will use via computers and laptops and black goods. So the Z House is actually 125% of regulated, so regulated 100%, so lights and stuff like that that's in your regulation, and then 25%. To put it simpler, probably 5 to 6 days of the week the house will get its energy and its heating via renewable technologies, and one day it'll take it off the grid. That's probably the best way to explain it. And the thing about Passivhouse, it's very good standard. It's not a regulation in Germany, which a lot of people don't realise. And there are numerous systems like it, Super E in Canada, and you could go around the world. I'm sure Sean can tell me more than I would know, but there are lots out there. Norway have theirs. And there was a cost to doing Passivhouse because they charge for the cost. And so I think we should learn from these other standards, but set our own that relates to our climate and our skills and the technology available to us. I think we should, borrow cheekily from these guys. And the thing with the Z House is 125% of operational energy, but we did actually look at embodied carbon. So we took material out of the tiles and the bricks and stuff like that. We did biodiversity. It's a gold graded RSPB garden. So we've got bat houses, swift houses, hedgehog houses. We've got green walls to entice insects. We looked at water. So we looked at driving past the golden 105 litres per person per day. So we had atomized showers, and it was our way of it's our concept house. So people always think of concept as cars, and they see these mad things go across. So we didn't do that. Actually, we just took an average house. But what we were able to do is throw infrared into it, different heating solutions, air source heat pump. So I threw everything in. And I know that to make a zero carbon as defined by, currently the English government, but followed by the Scottish and Welsh, because they've just released theirs, that's the 75% improvement to regs. So that's what I was about, was how am I going to do that sensibly? And if I'm honest, commercially viable for my landowners, for us, and for my customer.
Sure. Well, it kind of links with a question we've had via Twitter from Nick Owens. He's asked, what can we do to ensure that new homes that are about to get planning permission now are built to a real net zero standard? So not simply kind of heat pump ready and emitting unnecessarily carbon emissions. So
when he says real net zero ready,
he mentioned Leti, L-E-T-I. Something you're familiar with?
So Letti's to do with embodied carbon, and then it has a kilowattage output ruling around how much a building. The problem with Lett is it's too broad, because different buildings should have different kilowattage outputs. I'm getting quite techie now, so apologies. So Letti's good. Reba have got a good set of standards. I think my answer to that would be, you've got to think that, I think we need to recognise we've got an industry that, not too long ago wasn't putting insulation in cavities and has been using gas boilers. And I think you're right, the government have made a good move by ensuring that air source heat pumps can be refurbished later on. And I think we should have pilots and flagships that push the envelope. But I think, you know, it's one of those classics. It's pointless doing all of that if you don't bring everyone with you. So it's pointless climbing the mountain, getting over the mountain and getting to the lake, and everybody else is still at the beginning of the mountain saying, you know, how the hell do I get over the mountain? And it's not just about Barratt. I mean, if I'm honest, and I feel we should lead the way, I've got an innovation department, Jones and Sons, where the guy's the managing director, part-time plumber and electrician when needed. He's not going to have the time, and that's where Proctor and others come in, because we work with you guys, we develop the solutions, and now more than ever we need to allow those smaller companies to come in and use the supply chain that we've worked with and led, because we've set the Z House as our target, to go along. So I think, yeah, in the perfect world I'd like to be ready, but I think we just need to take a bit of time and work so everyone comes with us, and what you don't have.
Iain, did you have some? Sorry, go ahead. Did you want to finish, Oliver?
I was just going to say, Iain keeps putting his hand up. He's getting excited.
Sorry, I saw you, Iain. I saw you, Iain. Let's hear it.
Hi. Yeah, a great explanation by Oliver. I'm not quite sure I fully understand. I'll probably have to have time with Oliver later to go through that. It was really just to go back to Lucy's, the question Lucy had about Passivhouse. We like to use props in the webinars where we can, and I have some props here. On the Passivhouse, if you're to build a building that complies with the building regulations, having a backstop air tightness of 10, you're allowed a gap of 20 pence piece equivalent every square metre. Yeah. Now, the Germans would say that they would be very disappointed if their garden shed was built to that standard, and they would want a lot better. But if you then take Passivhouse air tightness standards is a 5 pence piece every 5 square metres. So it's not that we have lots of holes in the walls to comply with these, but it just shows how important the air tightness is in the holistic approach that Passivhouse takes, and how it can change from the building regulations. So it was just to add in those props on that might help. Okay,
thank you, Iain. Now, Steve, during your intro, and I'm interested to hear a little bit more, I know you're a bit sceptical or quite sceptical as to the COP26 success. Perhaps you can share a bit more on that, but really I'm interested if you can explain a little bit more about your thoughts on what adaptive architecture is, please, and what that might mean.
Wow, that's a huge one, Keira. Let's start at the beginning with the COP26. I think the Queen, and bless her, I hope she lasts for another 100 years, but I doubt it. But she was absolutely right in making sure she was overheard. All gas and gators. It was a politicians' gathering where they tried to show the world that they were caring and doing something. And there was always this big screen going on where they're saying they're getting the reduction down from 2 down to 1.8, and then, yeah, hooray, we've hit 1.5. As I said before, I doubt very much whether they understand where that figure comes from, how it's calculated, and the meaning of it. They seem to think that getting that value down is the be and end all. And it isn't not important, but it's important to understand the concepts of the whole system, because there's a knock-on effect, and the knock-on effect has already taken over. So if you warm the planet warm air sucks up more moisture from the oceans and the lakes and everywhere. But it's not like carbon, where carbon will stay in the atmosphere for an awful long time. The water can only stay up there for a certain amount of time, and it's days and weeks. So all of a sudden, the warm atmosphere is sucking up more moisture, and it is dropping huge amounts of water out of the atmosphere. Unfortunately, because of the way that the planet works, it may suck out in one area and dump it in another area. like poor northern Germany, who were sitting there one day thinking this is nice, and then all of a sudden they had downfalls like were biblical, and virtually 2/3 of the small town was washed away, and it wasn't their fault. It was nothing to do with them. Yet there was no explanation as to where the water came from and why it came. And that's the annoying thing about COP, is that they talk politics, trying to get the numbers down, getting big promises, shoving an awful lot of money into various projects without really understanding what they're doing. There was a little bit of talk about the permafrost. Iain, if you remember, years ago, we got involved with permafrost, looking at the way that we could control railway tracks and how some of the houses that we were building up in the Nordic were rafted on insulation. And there was no understanding of what's going on with the knock-on effect as far as permafrost is concerned, because it's happened. The methane that's coming out there is unprecedented. It's one of the big gases. And by the way, water is as bad as carbon in terms of its effect on everything else. So we need to understand this relational link between what's going on in the planet rather than the politics. Politics is important. It's what makes the world tick, but there has to be something, and I can't remember who said it, but perhaps it was Sean. We need this holistic approach with all the technical people. We've done it before, we can do it again, where we need to get on board and agree different standards. I tried to look at the global building regulations, and I'm still doing it, and that was a year ago. And when you try to read them, they are misleading, corrupt, wrong.
So there's a lot of work to be done, Steve.
Oh, yeah, huge amounts of work to be done. And I'm pleased that COP went ahead. It highlighted the problem, but the people who were doing it really don't understand. And that was the annoying thing. I didn't like the idea that the kids were shut out. I've got 4 grandchildren, and you know what we're doing now is my grandchildren's legacy, and I'm sad to say that I think they're going to have a hard time. Yeah. And that's the blunt end of what we're all trying to do. I think Sean is absolutely right. We can do it, and we've got to really stick down and get together and do this. You're all talking about different types of construction. I remember in the late 90s, we did a system called R2000, which was a Canadian system that the company I was working for, it was a Dow Chemical company, and I was doing insulation, and we got on board with the R2000 system to look at it. We built a house down there, but it never went anywhere. So we thought, but others, the Passivhouse system grew out of it, and all such things came out of it. But COP, I think, was useful, but effective, not really good.
Thank you, Steve. Appreciate that. Now, Christian's quite animated, wondering when we're actually going to start talking around the future of constructions and address actually the problems and the timing it needs. So, fair point. Sean, if I can come on to you, please, maybe you can answer a couple of questions here that we've had that also linked to talking about the future of construction. Can you go over, you talked about transformations. Can you maybe talk over what do you think in terms of the transformational shift that's required to get the construction sector on track to achieve net zero? And also, what are the major opportunities you see for the UK construction sector coming out of COVID? And how are we going to start addressing some of these problems?
That's 2 rather big questions. Okay, I'll go very quickly to the first one. In the transformational side, I mean, coming back to the point that Lucy mentioned as well, I mean, having a national retrofit strategy, and let's be clear here, the target and the demands ahead of us in terms of the future of construction UK are significant. We'll have to retrofit 850,000 homes a year in England alone till 2050, and that's visiting each house just one day in that next period of the years. Which is almost impossible. So in essence, there's going to be a huge shift in terms of the productivity and how we do that. And I can see part of the sector transforming in terms of the skills demand that will come, that will force much of new build to switch to offsite, because there just won't be enough of the skilled labour to do both. And we compete as a sector also with so many other sectors in attracting people, young people, particularly from school, but also retaining people in the sector. So that transformation probably needs to be multifold. In terms of the strategy ahead, I think we also need support. One of the sort of challenges for the sector going ahead is that public engagement as we engage with the retrofit and the amount of work to come. And part of that also will be the funding. And that's a real challenge for retrofit at the moment. So there's probably a window of opportunity now where potentially the governments could look at, for those that are in heavy industries, non-construction based or related to construction based, but those in heavy industries who are currently with high emissions and are at the process of finding solutions for their emissions from the industrial processes. What I'd like to see is that in the short term, they're encouraged to offset whilst they're trying to find those solutions. And that offset is then an investment by a carbon tax, which then goes into investing into the retrofit of the existing housing. So we're not standing still. We're getting a carbon reduction via retrofit, via offsetting by heavy industries as they're taking more time to get to those more complex solutions. In terms of a post-COVID world, real changes happening now. Lots of local authorities, government also across the UK are looking at 20-minute neighbourhoods or now N-minute neighbourhoods as more people are staying at home. More people may not always wish to work at home, but they'd like to work close to home. And we've seen a number of local authorities that had, let's say, empty premises, small office premises, which they would normally lease out, which were lying empty prior to COVID, now full. Because some people decided, actually, I don't want to work at home, but I want to work near to home. And so they're leasing out small offices, which is good. Those neighbourhoods then give an infrastructure to gap sites of what will be required for amenities and other issues. They also may provide those gap sites platforms for new community or district heating to be installed, but also supporting sustainable communities in other ways, for example, new housing. And that's where, again, offsite plays a role into these gap sites in 20-minute neighbourhoods going forward. We can't forget rural areas. They are having a tougher task than anyone else just now in terms of their emissions, if they're not on the gas grid, and the rising costs of energy, which are affecting everybody, particularly low incomes. If we look ahead to the future of construction in the UK, if rising costs continue as they currently do, or even if they're going up 5 or 6% per year, the payback period on retrofit and other things really starts to take a different shape. And that's on the proviso that those material costs don't increase beyond the 5 or 6% per year. Now, currently, we've had a really tough time recently with material costs and supply chains. And one final thought for future of construction, which interlinks to where we go. Europe will require to retrofit 11 million homes per year. We're all chasing the same technologies and the same processes. Currently, the government spends a minute amount for research funding for the construction sector, vis-a-vis any other sector. And that's not to take away the great work that's been done by the Innovation Centre in Scotland, the other work that's been done in England, the Innovate UK work, but we've really got to step up that work so we can accelerate more of the solutions and work together. So it's an exciting time, but we will need everyone to work holistically together to deliver this.
Thank you, Sean. Iain, we've had a comment here around regulations. I know that's an area that you've got a lot of expertise in. In terms of relaxation of regulations, do you feel this will encourage more refurbishment of older buildings?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point that we can strive for new build U values in refurbishment, but in the acoustics world that Sean will be well aware of, you are allowed a relaxation on the sound performance in older buildings. So if you had an older building, you could have less performance to allow people to do these refurbishments. If we did the same in housing with the thermal side, it would encourage people to do more refurbishment of the existing housing stock. We've had some questions from Alan Crawford, for example, about VAT in refurbishment. And I think that's the kind of thing, if we can use these buildings, instead of knocking them down and building new builds, then maybe refurbish them would be encouraged if we had a relaxation, whether it be VAT or on the regulations, to allow people to use these and refurbish them There's lots of technology out there that can be used that can still maintain the holistic approach in terms of moisture and thermal insulation. So you can do that. So I think it's a good point that some relaxation would allow some of existing buildings to be used.
Thank you. And Sean, you wanted to add to that?
Yes, very briefly, and I fully agree with Iain. The industry's asked for this for many years, and the Treasury hasn't accepted it. Separately, but interrelated, is what Italy's doing. So they're doing what's called a super bonus. So if someone decides to go for a retrofit, when they apply for the grant to fund that retrofit to their home, it's called a super bonus because they're paid 110%. They're given a 10% premium as a bonus to the occupant or the building owner to actually do that retrofit. Now, you can't do that with every house. The cost would be huge. But you could actually, for those that are maybe difficult or hard to treat, or areas where there's specific difficulty or low incomes, is there an opportunity there where you could actually accelerate that and look at the Italian model of what they're doing? On the other hand, Germany is currently taking their 1.5 degrees and then stepping back from the policy of signing up to 1.5 degrees and then calculating what is the energy usage per square meter or cubic meter of that house. Lett was touched on earlier, and I think the Lett reports which have come out are very useful. But when you look at the costs, some of the costs of those remedial works on their case studies are the cost of the purchase of 1 or 2 houses in other parts of the UK. So I think we have to be clear that if we're going to take the public with us, we need solutions which are cost effective and will actually mean something to their bank balance.
Thank you, Sean. I'm going to come on now to the topic around the building fabric. And Lucy, in your role at the CSIC, I'm interested in your thoughts in terms of why local materials are becoming more increasingly important within the building fabric of new or refurbished buildings.
There we go. Sorry, couldn't find the button there. Yeah, I mean, in the transition to net zero, we all need to be considering, the carbon footprint of the materials that we use. So they're embodied carbon, and we need to keep these as low as possible. So obviously, one way to do that is looking at locally sourced materials, because it reduces all the transport emissions that are involved in, particularly in importing materials from overseas, or even heavy materials from elsewhere in the UK, or from non-local sources. Equally, we've seen the challenges of Brexit. We've seen the challenges of COVID, lorry driver shortages. We've all had challenged construction supplies due to these, and that's really catalysed us to think much more about how do we use more local materials, and how do we source these local materials. But really, I suppose the huge benefit of reducing our reliance on imported materials is the economic and social benefits to our communities, our local communities, and equally to the supply chains. And we need to be building much more resilient supply chains. I suppose it is all about sort of looking at creating value by using local resources as much as possible, whether that's in Scotland, for instance, looking at new high-value applications for Scottish timber, for use in more mainstream timber frame, looking at mass timber, wood fibre insulations, local supplies like those from Proctor as a key Scottish materials manufacturer. And then new solutions that are coming on board. As Sean's saying, we need new solutions. We absolutely need more research and development in new solutions. And we've got some great ones coming out. K-Brick, the world's most sustainable brick, made from 90% recycled construction waste, an unfired brick with double thermal. It's got double thermal properties as well to a standard brick. That's come out of Heriot-Watt University as a spin out. We've got other companies looking at more natural insulation sources. These are all on our doorstep, and they have much better embodied carbon credentials, but most importantly, they're supporting our local economy and creating better communities for us.
Absolutely. Now, Lucy, while I've got you, Stuart Ruddy has asked, well, he said he'd be interested in your views on product passports and EPDs within procurement models, as well as aspects of circularity and construction products. That's something you know about?
Not very much. I'm sure that's the more knowledgeable people in my team that could probably answer that back at CSIC, but I don't know if the rest of the panel could.
I mean, EPDs being something we were discussing in the business recently. Would you have a comment on that?
Sorry, me, did you say?
Yes. Yeah. Do you have anything, because we were just discussing it internally recently, perhaps some of you have a comment on?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting concept of EPDs. It's something that we're looking at. It's something that I think we have to look at.
Can you just describe what this is? Sorry, for people may not know exactly what EPDs are.
Well, really, what we're looking at there is the energy performance balance, and really like life cycle. You can take it from various stages in the building, from cradle to grave, or just to manufacturing off the manufacturing sites of your products. So it's something that we have to take responsibly. Proctors are taking it even more responsibly now. How we responsibly source our products, our packaging, and all the side of it, the holistic sides. I keep saying holistic, but we are taking that all into consideration, and it's an interesting point that we need to take into consideration. I see Sean's looking to input into here as well.
Yeah, please do, Sean.
Thanks. Yeah. So I think one of the features we're looking at going ahead is with the post-Brexit. One of the aspects is the testing and development of products, but also the transition into the UK CA marking. So in terms of the future of construction UK over the next year, as we head up to the December 31st deadline in 2022, there are still thousands of products that need to be transferred from CE marking into UK CA. Currently, the circular economy attributes, which would be part of embodied carbon, would be great if embodied carbon came more into a legislative form. Currently, net zero is predominantly in all policies around countries operational carbon, but it's great to see a number of UK Green Building Council, CIC, and many others who are focusing on trying to encourage more embodied carbon to be included in how to calculate that. At the moment, if you think now in the future, the just sheer amount of products and resources globally will need, with the requirement to build 2 billion homes in the next 80 years vis-a-vis your existing stock, we should be actually embedding now that all public procurement, where possible in infrastructure and buildings, should be designing for deconstruction. That's almost even more important than embodied carbon right now. It's a statement that we need to design for future deconstruction. And by doing so, we could then encourage how we calculate, by designing for deconstruction, that embodied carbon. So there's an incentive for people for how they declare their buildings in terms of the carbon footprint, that they can recover that carbon and reutilize those materials in 100 years, 150 years, it doesn't matter. But we've kick-started now that really important factor of material resource going forward.
Thank you very much. Now, Oliver, coming from what was quite a traditional house building background, we have a question here to you. Do you foresee that traditional brick block buildings will continue to be used, or do you think modern alternatives will have to be looked at?
So if we try to get to 300,000 homes a year, which is a target that we haven't hit since the 50s, we would have to do traditional construction and new ways of construction. So yeah, going forward, traditional will remain. I could see, so traditional in Scotland is timber frame, obviously. In England, you know, and Wales, timber frame is seen as modern method of construction. There's a discussion on that I have regularly with many people, but that's currently the position. So I think traditional will remain, and we will just grow and build on it. I think the conversation that's previously been had, embodied carbon will play quite an important role in increasing the use of other products in the construction sector. I can see the MMC systems becoming a much greater percentage. I could see that with some of the larger house builders, it could be as high as 40% in the future. I'm not sure with the medium to small size house builders, well, that will be the case in England and Wales. Obviously, like I said, in Scotland, you take out block and brick and you put timber frame in, don't you? So, or block and you put timber frame in, so, and different cladding solutions. So yeah, it'll be hanging around for a while.
Okay, thank you, Oliver. And Steve, just touching on the modern methods of construction, I mean, what do you think? What's holding the industry back in terms of using MMC?
I agree with the comments made. This birth to death calculation is not unknown. It's not difficult. It just needs to be done. We started to look at what's called the digital twin. And funnily enough, it's a games company, Epic Games, who, if you're a gamer, you will know who they are. They've brought out something called Unreal. And within that, they brought out something called Twin Motion. And it is Twin Motion that is becoming incredibly interesting in the way that we can do this, not on one building, but on a city at the same time. Up till now, we've never had the computing power to do it, but the cloud is allowing this. And Unreal are now saying, okay, we've got all this. Epic Games has said, we've got the power in the computers, we can do it. We can do a whole city and calculate what's going on almost instantly. That is the future as far as looking at the materials and new construction. So if a new housing estate goes up, we can see not only how it's going to work immediately, but we can see 20, 30, 40 years in the future by running quite simple algorithms, not on one building, but on the estate as a whole in comparison to the rest of the city, which is often we've ignored. But we can do that now. So if you want to know what adaptive architecture is, it is all this idea of looking at not one building, but looking at the building in terms of everything that's surrounded, the whole city. And we can do that now. So we're looking, I mean, the university, we've got a games department. I mean, I just love going down there. You should see some of the games they're playing. It's wonderful. And I could sit there for hours. But what you look at the background is that they have now got the technology to allow the computer gamers to come on board with the computer guys and the AT and the School of Architecture to come up with something that is going to be incredibly changing in the way that we look at it. I can't say we can do a global thing because that's just, it's not insane, but it's pretty difficult. But a city is no problem. They're already doing it in New Zealand and Australia. We've got the chance to do it in here. The guy who is part of that department is an AT, and he is Sheffield trained, Sheffield University trained. So we've got the people on board now who are pushing it very strongly. This holistic approach to adaptive architecture. I don't have a problem if the house guys build on floodplains, if they do adaptive architecture. In other words, designed to allow the area to flood, lift the houses up on mounds like the Swiss do, allow the system to work rather than say, I ignore the whole idea of floodplains. We need it. SUDS is so important in the way that we look at it. And you can't just look at one building in SUDS. You've got to look at the whole area, how the SUDS is being effective and used across there. And for those who don't know, it's a sustainable urban drainage. So it's a fascinating area of adaptive architecture where we can see not just one building, but a complete city on its own working. And that includes the traffic, the weather coming in. I mean, the weather is not difficult to do. We can drag the stuff in from the Met Office. And the Met Office is one of the world's leading weather systems. And they've got the data that allows us to bring it in and just analyze, how it's going to work and how it's going to affect.
I think you're right, Steve.
Store the water.
Yeah, I think you're right. With technologies today, there's so many different elements you can draw in. Thank you for that. I see Oliver and Iain both had a comment. Iain, can I come to you first very quickly because we are running quickly out of time?
Yeah, I think it was just really quickly to mention, you know, the cradle to grave side of things. When we're doing product development, and we obviously do quite a lot of product development, part of our product development is what we're going to do with the product when it's finished. We had that discussion earlier this week with a customer that was asking, what do we do with the product when it's finished? Now, it takes a while to finish the product, so we're probably talking 40, 50 years, but we still have to think, what do you do with the product when it's finished? And I have a product here that we're looking at. If we can keep it between ourselves, this is a new product that we're looking at. And this is using the blades of windmills.
Wind turbines, yeah.
Wind turbines. And we're using the blades of that we can mold it into a different shape and use that shape that can be used in the building for over 30 to 40 years. But at the end of its life, we can then do something else with it. So it's something that in terms of our product development that we're starting to take seriously.
It's fair to say, I mean, these wind turbines, they're buried. They're not recycled. They just get put into landfill, don't they? So it's reuse of materials, absolutely. And Oliver, you had something to add to what Steve was saying.
Just a quick one, maybe part of my finishing off really. So on Wednesday, I had 612 to 14-year-olds. We were with Brian Cox, the scientist, and we're trying to get them into construction, because I mean, back in the day, you know, you failed your exams, you came to construction. That's the way it was, because everyone thought we were plumbers and bricklayers. We're trying to show them that we're doing robotics in MMC, we're doing, you know, we're helping nature, we've got architects, engineers, but actually I am saying probably being a bricklayer, you learn more than the architects nowadays, just to be clear. So actually there's lots of careers. And we were playing games. So they were running around finding coins, and each coin had a carbon-based thing to it. And there was a competition. So actually we are already gamifying to connect in with those 12 to 14-year-olds and try and get them to understand that actually they are the future, and we need their brains really to make the difference. Because frankly speaking, most of us, or many of us, me especially, as much as I like to think I'm innovative, these guys blow you out of the water because they just don't think like we do, because they haven't been inbred like I have on construction, where I've been on muddy boots doing traditional methods, both timber frame and block work. They just think completely differently. So
thank you, Oliver. Now, I know we've run out of time, but I do have one last question, which has been directed to Sean via email, which I'm going to ask, and then we'll close up if that's okay. Sean, Charlie Borman has asked, can offsite construction play an integral role in the delivery both for future construction, societal housing and housing need, and net zero?
Certainly, I believe so. It's not the panacea. It's a fantastic route towards it, but we also need to deliver better offsite for our substructure. And in doing so, to deliver the maximum benefit of offsite, we need our utilities to work at a faster pace and encourage utilities or investments such that we can actually put the infrastructure in front into the site, which then supports the acceleration of that offsite net zero delivery. Certainly from a circular economy standpoint, it's very good. There are solutions also in offsite for some of the retrofit measures which are out there. And that's why having a kind of national retrofit strategy, archetype solutions for specific buildings, you could actually then sort of mainstream a lot of that development into offsite for some of the retrofit abilities. We're seeing now in Holland, for example, they're putting on entire skins around buildings as part of their offsite retrofit, entire new roofing systems. So the technology is there, and I agree with Stephen, there's the ability is there, and very much with what Oliver was saying, if we can encourage young people to come through and see the excitement. I gave presentations prior to COVID to 1,000 school kids and parents in East Lothian in Edinburgh, and at parents' evenings when they were talking about subject choice. And the one thing the parents were blown away with was, one, they had no idea about the diversity of the jobs that were out there, but two, they had no indication or idea of the salaries that were in this sector. And the interest that came back And that's just understandable because mum and dads are concerned about, you know, it's a tough world out there. What's the salaries like? So we need to incentivize and support the sector as much as we can to encourage more people in. But it's a great sector and it's so diverse, and we're very lucky to work in it.
Thank you very much, Sean. Okay, we did say at the beginning that we would close this as close to 11 as we can. So I'm so sorry, there's a number of questions still unanswered. We will come back to you, either Proctor Group ourselves or seek advice from the experts on the panel and answer all of your questions. So the good news is next year we will be doing more webinars, of course, traditional webinars, and we'll also be having more of these roundtable discussions. So we hope to have some, if not all, of some of these panel members joining us next year. So can I just say thank you very much to all 5 of you. Great job, very well answered, and I can even see from the number of comments and certainly the questions and comments coming through in the YouTube feed that the audience will have enjoyed this. So thank you again. Date for the diary, Friday the 28th of January is Proctor Group's next webinar. This is our last for the year, which is why I put my Christmas tree up, so a good excuse for my husband was questioning me about it the other night, and I said no, it's for the webinar. So Merry Christmas to everyone, have a wonderful Christmas and New Year, enjoy the time with your family and friends, and we will hopefully see you all on the 28th of January, where our topic will be around fire solutions and fire membranes. So we look forward to seeing you then. Thank you very much.